there. My name is Alan St. Jean. I am an author of a book called Aidan of Oren. Welcome to the first video podcast. With each podcast, we will have a word of the day, we will have a fun fact, and then I will read the book to you, and you will see the book come up on the screen as I read it. So let's get started. The first fun fact for you is Aidan of Oren. This is the first book I ever wrote. Back in 2004, I know you guys weren't even born yet. That's beside the point. And we're going to have some fun as I read the book. The word for the day is pizza. Pizza. And I'll use that word in a sentence. I love pizza. There. See how easy this is? All right, let's get into the book, Aidan of Oren. I won't tell you anything about it. I will just start reading it to you. Are you ready? Let me get to the first page. Oh, hold on. I need these. Yeah, because I can't see without them. And there's this. This is my favorite cup. It has a bear on it. Some people think I look like a bear. I don't see it. Anyway, here we go. Aidan of Oren. The journey begins. It is the first book of a trilogy, which means there are actually 3 books in the series. We will start with a chapter called The Awakening. Awake, awake. Aidan sat straight up in bed. He looked around his bedroom, but no one was there. Odd, he thought. Was I dreaming? But it was so real. He sat motionless, listening, hardly breathing. As he looked from shadow to shadow, his eyes pierced the darkness. All seemed in order. Slowly and silently, he pulled his quilt aside and stepped out of bed. The wood plank floor beneath his feet felt cold as he moved across the room. Perched in the corner was Aidan's pet falcon, Charles. He was fast asleep. This was not the first time Aidan had been awakened by a dream. Lately, he had been having many dreams. Dreams about castles, knights in shining armor, ferocious dragons, giants, and curious elves. Ever since he was very little, Aidan was intrigued by the stories told by the old woman of the village. They often gathered together in the fireplace room here at his grandmama's cottage to work on quilts, and while they did, they told the most magical stories. Aidan's bedroom was right beside the fireplace room. He looked forward to these nights. Grandmama would come into his room and tuck him into bed. With a gentle kiss on his forehead, she would whisper good night and return to her friends just outside his door. After pretending to be asleep, Aidan would crawl out of bed and peek through a crack in his door. He would watch and listen, often late into the night, hanging on every word as the stories would unfold. The old women told tales of adventure, some funny, some scary. Grandmama was the very best storyteller of them all. But they were just stories. Stories told around the glowing warmth of a roaring fire. Aidan moved toward the door and peeked through the crack into the fireplace room. The glowing embers revealed only that the room was now empty. The old women had already gone home. Still confused by what he had heard, Aidan went back to bed. He shuffled around on his hay-filled mattress and wrapped himself tightly in Grandmama's quilt. Finding a comfortable spot, he lay back and stared at the ceiling. Although he was used to dreaming about the stories he overheard, tonight's dream was different. Tonight, Aidan had dreamed of a magnificent horse, but not just any horse, a pure white horse with wings. None of the stories told by his grandmama or her friends mentioned such a horse. Awake, awake. The words still echoed in his head. It all seemed so real, but it must have been a dream. What else could it be? Eventually, Aidan fell back to sleep. That's the end of chapter 1. Let's move on to chapter 2. Good morning, Aidan, said Grandmama as she opened the shutters, flooding Aidan's bedroom with a burst of sunlight. I trust you slept well, she said with a twinkle in her eye. Aidan slowly sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes and nodding toward his grandmother. Breakfast will be ready soon. Would you fetch some water for me? Of course, Grandmama, said Aidan. I had a dream last night. That's nice, dear, she said as she moved toward the door to leave the room. It was about a beautiful white horse with wings. Grandmama stopped suddenly. What did you say? I was telling you about my dream, Aidan said excitedly. I saw a great white horse with enormous wings flying through the air. It was dark. I was barefooted and standing outside in the middle of the night. Grandmama took a step back into Aidan's room. If it was dark, how can you be sure that the horse you saw had wings? That's the best part. He walked right up to me. The moon was bright, and he was so close I could see every detail. He was the most magnificent beast I've ever seen. Was that all of the dream? She asked. No, there was a voice. It was a very big voice, but it didn't come from the horse. It wasn't that loud, you know, but it was big. What did the voice say? It said, awake, awake. I see, she said softly as she walked out of his room and started to close the door. 13 years. My, that went by fast, didn't it, boy? Aidan wondered about Grandmama's odd remark. True, his 13th birthday was only 2 days away. But what did that have to do with his dream? He started to ask, but it was too late. Grandmama had already closed the door. Aidan sat quietly on his bed. Facing the open window, with his eyes closed, he soaked in the morning sun and smiled broadly back at the light that seemed to wrap itself around him. The warmth felt good, and the gentle breeze whispered in his ears. His thoughts turned back to Grandmama. She was the only parent that he had ever known. He could not imagine life without her. Long ago, Grandmama had told him that when he was a baby, his parents brought him to the country of Lionsgate. They had placed him with her in a remote area just south of Oren village, between the Botham Sea and Zorn Mountain. Something about a war, but it was only supposed to be for a while. Grandmama did not often speak of Aidan's parents. He knew only that his father was a very good man who was needed by people in a land far away. As for his mother, Grandmama spoke of her very warmly, as if she was love itself. Aidan longed for the day when they would be reunited. Opening his eyes, Aidan could see that it was a clear morning. Somehow, it seemed brighter than an ordinary sunny day. He chuckled to himself as he quickly put on his clothes and headed out the door. Brighter than a normal day? Aidan said aloud to himself. Am I going crazy? A sunny day is a sunny day. And that is that. Maybe I didn't sleep so well after all. He smiled to himself as he headed toward the well. As he walked around to the back of the cottage, he could feel his legs starting to tense. Aidan didn't like the well. It was very old and very, very deep. The stones that surrounded it were ancient and cracked. The opening of the well wasn't even round. Rather, it was somewhat oval-shaped, curiously larger at one end than the other. When he was younger, Aidan used to drop rocks into the well, listening for them to hit something, anything. However, he never heard a sound. Yet every time the bucket was lowered into the well, it always came up with sparkling, clean, fresh water. This was a mystery to Aidan. It even made him feel a little afraid. However, he told no one for fear that some might view him as cowardly. Today, as he lowered the bucket and watched it disappear into darkness, he felt even more anxious than usual. Maybe it was because of last night's dream. Aidan focused on the task and tried very hard to ignore the butterflies in his stomach. As he began to draw the bucket up from the well, the crank jammed. Startled, Aidan froze. The bucket was caught on some rocks about 3 feet from the top of the well. Aidan was petrified with the thought of reaching into the well. As he pondered his dilemma, 2 small hands reached around his head and covered his eyes. "Guess who?" shouted a gleeful little voice. Aidan was startled, but quickly recognized this game. He put his hands over the ones on his eyes and said teasingly, "Is it a baby bear?" "No," shouted the little voice, bursting into laughter. "Well," said Aidan, "maybe this is Charles, my trusted pet falcon." Oh, it couldn't be. His claws would be digging into my eyes by now. "No, guess again." "Well, this couldn't be little Mackenzie, could it?" How did you know?" "Oh, just a lucky guess," said Aidan as he turned to face her. Mackenzie jumped into his arms and hugged Aidan so tightly he could hardly breathe. "What adventure will we go on today?" "The first thing we need to do is to get the bucket of water out of the well," said Aidan. "It seems to be stuck." Together they looked down into the well. "It's just stuck on that rock down there," said Mackenzie matter-of-factly. "Just hold on to my legs and lower me down so I can work the bucket free." "No," Aidan said firmly. "We'll find another way." "Don't be silly," said Mackenzie as she crawled up on the edge of the well. "This will just take a moment." Aidan quickly but carefully pulled Mackenzie away from the well. "What are you doing?" she said as she turned to face him. "I can't reach the bucket from here." Aidan studied her determined little face. Her blonde hair glistened in the sunlight, and her piercing blue eyes somehow assured him that everything would be all right. "You're pretty brave for a 7-year-old, he said. "At least wait until I have a hold of you." Aidan lifted his little friend with ease and carefully held her in place as she reached into the well and effortlessly freed the water bucket. "See?" said Mackenzie as Aidan put her back onto the ground. "That wasn't so hard." Aidan froze. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "It's coming from the well." "I'll beat you to the house," shouted Mackenzie as she darted away. There was no catching her, not with a bucket of water in his hand. Aidan looked back at the well. The peculiar sounds had stopped, although the uneasy trembling in his legs had not. He finally turned and headed up toward the cottage, where he knew a good, hot breakfast would be waiting for him. Well, we are off and running. We will see you next time for the Aidan of Oren videocast. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.